Hey guys, tonight we step into a world you probably wouldn't want to visit in daylight, let alone wander through half asleep. You find yourself drifting backward through the centuries, and when you open your eyes, the cobbled streets of medieval Europe stretch out before you. The air is thick with smoke from hearths, a faint tang of manure, and the unmistakable buzz of gossip in the market square. This isn't the fairy tale Middle Ages with shining knights and banquet halls. It's the underbelly, the job so grim, so backbreaking, so unbearable, that you probably won't survive this little tour without wrinkling your nose. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below with your location and local time, because I'm always curious about where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle along muddy lanes where chickens dart between your feet, their feathers brushing your boots. Above you, laundry flaps from creaking wooden beams. You're not here to admire architecture. You're here to peer into the lives of those who held the jobs no one wanted but someone had to do. The Middle Ages, from roughly the 5th to the 15th century, thrived on labor. Behind every shining cathedral stood armies of workers whose names never made it into manuscripts. And for every knight in gleaming armor, there were dozens of peasants bent double in fields, their hands raw from toil. Historians still argue whether the so-called feudal system was truly as rigid as textbooks make it sound, but one thing is certain: labor wasn't glamorous. If you weren't wealthy or ordained, you were working, often in jobs that brought little more than aching bones and a short lifespan. And while you might think your modern 9-to-5 is exhausting, just imagine waking each morning knowing your entire day would revolve around stench, disease, or the looming possibility of being blamed for the weather not cooperating with crops. You step through the gates of a bustling town. The smell changes here, rancid fish mingling with the sharp tang of tanning leather. A butcher waves his blood-spattered cleaver calling to customers. Yet even he, at least, sells something valuable. The jobs we're about to sink into live beneath this layer, hidden, despised, or mocked. These people were often necessary, sometimes feared, and always underpaid. Let's start with perspective. Modern surveys like to joke about the worst jobs in history. You know, sewer workers or roadkill collectors. But medieval life pushed the bar far lower. In fact, there's an actual account from the 14th century where a chronicler sneered at gong farmers, men who shoveled out cesspits at night, describing their lives as both essential and revolting. You'll meet them soon enough, but first understand this. Medieval people didn't share our obsession with sanitation. Waste ran through streets, dumped out of windows with a shouted warning. And where you find filth, you find laborers forced to deal with it. Yet some of the worst jobs weren't merely dirty. They were dangerous. Consider the leech collector, wandering into swamps with bare legs, waiting for slimy creatures to latch on so they could later be used in medicine. Or the plague barrier, who handled corpses by the dozen, often without knowing if their own body would give in within the week. Imagine, too, the miner who burrowed deep underground with only a flickering torch, not knowing if he'd die of gas fumes or collapse before the day was out. Medieval humor wasn't kind either. Popular songs and jests made fun of fullers, the men who cleaned cloth with urine, calling them piss beaters. Rats weren't just pests, they were a livelihood for rat catchers who risked disease for pennies. And the treadmill worker, trudging endlessly to power a mill or lift stones, often literally lived inside a giant wooden hamster wheel. As you picture yourself walking these alleys, your own feet slipping on mud, you realize something. Survival wasn't guaranteed. Every step risked infection. Every job meant exposure to elements you couldn't control. And if you thought society offered sympathy? Hardly. Many of these workers lived on the edges, distrusted or shunned. Executioners, for instance, carried out the will of justice but were avoided like contagion afterward. People needed them, but no one invited them for drinks. And yet, beneath the grime and hardship, these jobs kept the medieval world turning. Without gong farmers, cesspits would overflow into streets. Without plague barriers, cities would drown in corpses. Without millers, no bread. And without miners, no cathedral spires. The irony is that history tends to glorify kings while forgetting the very backs those kingdoms stood upon. You pause at the corner of the market, letting your eyes adjust as twilight falls. The glow of torches begins to paint everything in orange. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls. You think about your own hands, soft compared to the calloused ones you glimpse everywhere around you. Perhaps you'd prefer to stay in the modern world after all. But tonight, you don't get that luxury. Tonight, you're stuck walking beside the very people whose sweat made castles rise and cities survive. A quirky tidbit comes to mind here. In some villages, children were warned to behave or else the gong farmer will take you away. Imagine being so scary not because of violence but because you smelled like human waste. That was enough to terrify the young. So, as you stand there in the medieval dusk, the first chapter of this grim little walk has begun. You'll go deeper, through latrines, swamps, plague pits, and kitchens, each job worse than the last. And with each step, the soft lull of history will carry you further from your comfort zone, closer to the edge of nightmares dressed as daily labor. But don't worry, you're safe for now. You slip away from the noisy market, following a narrow lane that winds between timbered houses. The smell thickens here. A low, sour odor lingers in the air, one that makes you instinctively breathe through your mouth. And then you see it. An unassuming wooden door leading down into darkness. This is where the gong farmer begins his night. A gong farmer is, quite literally, the human plunger of the Middle Ages. His job? To climb into cesspits and dig out the human waste that's been fermenting there for months, sometimes years. Imagine the reek of latrines emptied straight into a pit beneath a house, or the corner of a courtyard, all seeping into the soil. And then imagine being the one to shovel it out, cart after cart in the dead of night so no one sees you. That's you tonight. The medieval world didn't exactly sparkle with sanitation laws. People hurled buckets of slop from their windows into the street, shouting "Gardy Lou" in some cities as a half-hearted warning. But even these charming habits couldn't compete with what happened underground. A household or tavern's cesspit filled up, and someone had to clear it. That someone was paid reasonably well, surprisingly well, in fact. Records suggest gong farmers could earn more than many manual workers, yet their reward came with a cost. Permanent stench clinging to skin and clothes, social ostracism, and real danger. You descend into the pit with your shovel and bucket. The torchlight flickers, throwing shadows against the walls slick with filth. You can almost hear the slurp as your boots sink into the muck. The work is slow. Scoop, lift, dump. And you keep telling yourself, don't breathe too deeply. But eventually you can't help it. The fumes choke you. Ammonia burns your throat. Methane makes you dizzy. This was no exaggeration. Chroniclers note cases where gong farmers collapsed and died mid-job, suffocated by the gases building up in those tight, airless spaces. Historians still argue whether medieval authorities understood the true dangers of miasmas, or whether they simply blamed disease on foul smells in general. Either way, the risk was real. A gong farmer could lose consciousness, tumble face first into his own work, and never come back up. Now picture what happens after you climb out. You're caked in filth, clothes stained in ways that won't wash out. Neighbors wrinkle their noses as you pass. Children point and laugh. Even if you're paid, you're an outcast. Marriage prospects? Almost none. Respect? Forget it. Some towns even required gong farmers to live outside the city walls. You were essential but unwanted. Tolerated only because without you, Streets and homes would drown in excrement. A quirky tidbit slips in here. Some records claim gong farmers sold the waste they collected to farmers as fertilizer. Imagine finishing your shift covered in stench, and then haggling in the market to sell barrels of, well, night soil. Fresh from the pit, you might joke, though no one would laugh too loudly. The odd thing is, compared to many medieval laborers, gong farmers could actually save money. High risk meant higher pay, at least in some cities. But wealth didn't buy them entry into polite society. In fact, executioners and gong farmers often occupied similar social territory, paid by necessity, avoided otherwise. One medieval poem sneered that you could always smell a gong farmer before you saw him. You walk away from the pit, night air still not enough to clear your nose. But the sound of your own footsteps comforts you. After all, this job was nocturnal. Gong farmers worked at night to avoid offending daytime passers-by. You imagine yourself trudging home under starlight, coins jingling faintly, though no one wants to walk beside you. The work was steady, if humiliating, and in a strange way, it underlined the medieval truth. No matter how grand a castle or how holy a cathedral, human waste still had to go somewhere. And someone like you, had to deal with it. Without gong farmers, medieval life would have drowned in its own excess. So you march through the shadows, thinking of how quickly the glamour of chivalry fades when seen through the lens of sewage. The knight might polish his armor, the lord might toast his wine, but all of them eventually would call on the services of the gong farmer. Their dignity rested, quite literally, on your shoulders. You leave behind the cloying stink of the cesspit, stepping into open air that feels almost like perfume compared to what you've just endured. But don't get too comfortable. Tonight you're headed out of town, across marshy ground where fog clings low and frogs croak like restless watchmen. This is leech country, and your job now is leech collector. The task seems simple on paper. Wade into stagnant water and let the creatures attach themselves to your legs. They'll draw blood, then drop off when full. Scoop them up, toss them into a container, and later sell them to physicians. Easy coin, right? Except nothing in the medieval world is ever easy. You roll your trousers to your knees, feeling the mud cold between your toes. Then you step into the water. Almost immediately you feel the slick slither of something brushing your skin. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the leeches find you, latching on with tiny but insistent mouths. You grimace, fighting the urge to slap them away. Instead, you stand still, trembling, while they feed. Your blood becomes their bait. Medical practice of the time considered leeches indispensable. Physicians believed in balancing the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you were ill, odds were the doctor blamed an excess of blood. And how better to drain it than with living syringes? A pouch of fresh leeches could make a difference between being turned away at a sickbed or welcomed with payment. Demand was high. Supply depended on collectors like you. Historians still argue whether leech therapy actually helped or simply worsened conditions. Some suggest it occasionally reduced high blood pressure or swelling, though medieval doctors certainly didn't understand it in those terms. What they knew was that patients sometimes felt lighter after bleeding, which was enough to justify an entire industry. But let's talk danger. These marshes are breeding grounds not only for leeches but also for disease. Stagnant water spreads fevers, and repeated blood loss weakens collectors themselves. Your legs ache from dozens of bites, each leaving a slow ooze of crimson that trickles into the muck. Infection lurks in every wound. Imagine going home night after night with open sores, your body scarred with tiny crescent marks. This was the collector's badge of honor, or more accurately, their curse. Quirky tidbit: There's a story from rural England of women being sent to gather leeches as part of household chores, their skirts dragging in the water to attract more creatures. Picture it. Mothers scolding daughters for not coming back with enough bloodsuckers. What do you mean you only filled half the jar? It almost sounds like a dark fairy tale, but it was simply life. As you scoop wriggling handfuls into a clay pot, you imagine the end buyer, a physician dressed in black robes, face serious, purse heavy. He'll apply these same leeches to nobles, to monks, maybe even to kings. In a twisted way, your swamp-soaked labor climbs into castles. Without you, there is no cure, no therapy, no ritual of balance. And yet, in town, you'll never get recognition. People recoil when they see the streaks on your legs, the slime clinging to your hands. Children might laugh, calling you blood bag. Neighbors mutter about your constant weakness, your pale skin. And deep down, you wonder if you've shortened your own lifespan by half just to feed the superstitions of medicine. You stagger out of the swamp, clay pot sloshing with writhing black worms. The moonlight glints on their slick bodies, making them look almost metallic. For a moment you pause, exhausted, staring back at the dark water. Somewhere behind you, frogs croak and an owl hoots. You wipe blood from your shin, though it smears rather than cleans. Another night finished. Another pot of leeches delivered to a buyer, who will never once step into this swamp themselves. You're the middleman between suffering and attempted cure, but the cost is always yours to pay. The swamp fades into memory, but your relief doesn't last long. A distant bell tolls, and suddenly you're pulled into the streets of a town where silence hangs heavy. Doors are barred, windows shuttered, and a faint, sour odor floats in the air, a smell that no one mistakes anymore. This is plague country, and your new role is plague barrier. You grip the handles of a crude wooden cart. It creaks under the weight of bodies already piled there, covered loosely with cloth or straw. Some faces peek through, skin blotched with the black swellings of buboes. Others look eerily peaceful, as though sleep has only just taken them. But you know better. These are victims of the Black Death, and your duty tonight is to haul them to the mass graves outside the walls. The Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, killing millions. Some scholars estimate 1/3 of the population perished in just a few years. Cities turned to chaos, villages emptied overnight, and fear lingered like a fog. And yet, even in terror, practical needs remained. The dead had to be moved. Left inside homes or stacked in alleys, they would rot, spreading panic and stench. Someone had to carry them away. That someone is you. You push the cart down the cobbles, the iron wheels clattering in the night. Now and then, a voice calls out from behind a door. Take him too. A small bundle is left on the step, hastily wrapped. Sometimes it's a child, sometimes it's an old woman. You lift them gently, place them atop the rest, and continue on. It's mechanical after a while, the motions dulling your mind. You can't think too hard or you'll collapse under the horror. Historians still argue whether plague barriers were themselves condemned men forced into service, or desperate peasants taking any coin they could. Some evidence suggests criminals were pardoned in exchange for this grim labor. Others think impoverished villagers volunteered, gambling with their lives for survival money. Either way, mortality was high. Few lasted long on the job. The stench is indescribable. Even with vinegar-soaked rags tied around your face, the rot seeps through. Your stomach churns. You try to breathe shallow, but every gust of wind carries it straight into you. And then there's the constant terror. Is that itch on your neck a flea bite? Did the cough you heard earlier come from you or from someone in the shadows? And yet, bizarrely, the role sometimes came with unexpected respect. A quirky tidbit. In certain towns, plague barriers were given free ale or bread at taverns, a kind of grim thank you for keeping the streets clear. But the gratitude was temporary. When the outbreak ended, survivors often shunned those who had worked with the corpses, fearing they carried some lingering curse. You trudge outside the town gates where a wide pit yawns in the earth. Torches flicker on the rim, casting jagged shadows across the mounded soil. You and a few others heave the bodies one by one into the trench. They land with dull thuds, the sound muffled by the sheer number already below. There is no ceremony, no prayer, just efficiency. Earth will be thrown over them in the morning. You pause for a moment, looking at the pit. It's impossible to count how many lie there. Dozens? Hundreds? You shake your head. Your job is not to reckon the numbers. Your job is to keep going until the cart is empty. Then you'll go back, fetch more, and repeat until exhaustion or infection claims you too. By dawn, your body aches from lifting, your skin is slick with sweat, and your throat burns from the fumes. You stagger home, avoiding your own family, afraid to breathe too near them. Payment clinks in your pouch, small comfort against the gnawing dread in your chest. As you collapse onto a straw mat, you realize you've seen more faces of the dead in a week than most people see in a lifetime. And still, the bell tolls again in the distance, calling you back to the cart. Morning never feels fresh after a night with the dead. But your new assignment doesn't let you rest either. Instead of the silent streets of plague-ridden towns, you're thrown into the thick, noisy world of the battlefield. Tonight, you are the camp follower, the one who trudges behind armies and scrapes a living from their carnage. You shuffle through mud churned by thousands of boots and hooves, the smell of sweat and steel in the air. Trumpets blare, banners ripple, and soldiers jostle around you, laughing nervously before the fight. Your role is not glorious. You won't swing a sword or earn songs. Instead, you'll carry water, mend clothes, gather firewood, or worse, collect the spoils from bodies once the clash is done. Historians still argue whether camp followers were mostly wives and families of soldiers or desperate wanderers tagging along for survival. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Some came willingly, cooking meals and patching armor for husbands. Others, especially the poor, trailed armies because war at least promised food, if not safety. The battle erupts. You stand back, clutching your bundle of rags, heart pounding. Men collide in a blur of shields and blades. Arrows whistle overhead, and the ground shakes with the thunder of horses. The clash is deafening, and you wonder if this is the moment the world ends. You mutter a prayer, though you're not sure which saint covers people like you. When the dust finally settles, silence falls like a curtain. Then comes your part. You creep among the fallen, stepping over sprawled bodies, ignoring groans from those not yet gone. Your job isn't to fight but to strip. You tug boots from stiff legs, unbuckle belts, pry rings off swollen fingers. Sometimes you must cut. Sometimes you must look away. A quirky tidbit. In some accounts, camp followers became surprisingly skilled surgeons, stitching wounds or boiling herbs for poultices. Not from training, just from grim necessity. If a soldier collapsed near you, it fell to your hands to stop the bleeding, even if all you had was a strip of your own hem. You might save one man only to watch another die at your feet. But this scavenging has risks. Soldiers who survived the clash sometimes wake as you tug at their gear. They lash out, mistaking you for an enemy. Others accuse you of theft, even though everyone knows spoils are part of your pay. And always there's the looming danger of a rout. If the opposing army regroups, you'll be the first to die, unarmed and burdened with plunder. You stagger under the weight of your haul, dented helmets, cracked shields, torn tunics, still sticky with blood. Back at camp, these will be bartered for bread or ale. Perhaps you'll even trade for a scrap of meat, tough and sinewy, but better than starving. As night falls, you sit by the fire with others like you. Some laugh, making crude jokes to mask the horror. Others sit silent, staring into the flames as though they see every battle they've ever scavenged replaying in the embers. You share a hunk of stale bread, your fingers trembling, your ears still ringing from the clash. This job wears you differently than plague duty. The plague was quiet despair. The battlefield is chaos and shock, then silence so heavy it crushes you. Both leave you haunted, but in different ways. You think back to the swamp, to the leeches, to the pits. Each roll gnaws at you, carving away little pieces of who you are. Still, you'll rise tomorrow. Still, you'll trail the army, carting supplies and tending fires. Because in this world, survival often means latching onto the strongest force around. Even if that force is destruction itself. The battlefield fades and the sounds of clashing steel dissolve into the clatter of looms and the slosh of buckets. Tonight you're no longer trailing armies. You're standing ankle-deep in vats of liquid surrounded by bundles of cloth. You've become a fuller, one of the most unglamorous but utterly necessary workers in medieval towns. The task sounds simple on parchment. Take raw, woven wool cloth and make it thick, strong, and smooth. But the reality is an endless cycle of stomping, soaking, and enduring smells that make even plague pits feel familiar. You tramp barefoot in a large trough, pounding the cloth over and over with your legs until it felts together. Each squelching step is meant to cleanse and tighten the weave. The secret ingredient? Human urine, collected in buckets from neighbors who've been paid a few coins to save their chamber pots for you. Yes, you spend your day knee-deep in pee. Historians still argue whether fullers deliberately advertised for urine donations on street corners, or whether collection was a more discreet business handled by guilds. Either way, there was no hiding what you did once the stench clung to you. No matter how many times you scrub, the sour tang of ammonia never quite leaves your skin. But it's not only urine. Some workshops add chalk or fuller's earth, a clay-like substance that helps absorb grease and lanolin. You stir the brew, your nose wrinkling, your eyes watering. Day after day, your muscles ache from the constant motion, pounding and folding, while the wet wool slaps against your shins. Imagine a job that combines the monotony of kneading dough, the exhaustion of marching in place, and the perfume of a latrine. That's your life as a fuller, a quirky tidbit. In some towns, fullers' vats were heated slightly, and the fumes rising from them were considered so strong they could knock a grown man unconscious. Children were sometimes sent in to do the initial stomping, their small bodies less likely to collapse. Of course, that meant little feet wrinkling in a stew of wool, chalk, and ammonia. Childhood memories in medieval Europe weren't all knights and castles. Despite the nastiness, your job is vital. Finished cloth fuels trade across Europe. Merchants sell it in fairs. Nobles wear it in their finery. Peasants rely on it for warmth. Without fullers, wool would remain coarse and greasy, useless for fine garments. In some sense, you are the hidden backbone of fashion. But does anyone thank you? Not really. The townsfolk eye you with suspicion. They wrinkle their noses when you pass, whispering jokes about how you smell worse than the tanner's dog. Yet they still depend on your work. You notice the hypocrisy, but you're too tired to care. After 12 hours stomping in the vat, all you want is a stale crust of bread and a dark corner to collapse in. The danger isn't just the stink. Your skin burns from constant exposure to ammonia. Cracks open between your toes. Infections fester. In winter, working barefoot in freezing liquid leaves you shivering for hours, teeth chattering as you try to keep the cloth moving. And the vats themselves? Slippery, treacherous. One wrong step and you tumble in face first, coughing and gagging, blinded by the acrid brew. Yet, there's a strange rhythm to it. Step, stomp, fold, step. The cloth softens beneath your feet, transforming from greasy wool into something finer. You tell yourself it's progress, that you're shaping the world in your own hidden way. And maybe that thought keeps you going, even when your stomach turns and your head aches from the fumes. By evening, your legs feel like lead. Your clothes cling with damp and your nose is so numb you barely register the stink anymore. You haul the dripping bundles from the trough, hang them to dry, and glance at your raw, reddened feet. Tomorrow you'll do it again, The same motions, the same vats, the same stink. Still, you survive another day, which in the Middle Ages is more than many could say. And as you limp home through the narrow streets, villagers part to avoid the smell, but you chuckle softly to yourself. After all, when they slip into their warm wool tunics at night, they owe a quiet debt to you, the fuller, stomping away in the shadows. Your work with wool barely dries before you're pulled to an even harsher duty. Tonight, you're crouched by the riverbank, breathing smoke and metal, working as a tanner. If the fuller's job stained your skin and clothes with the smell of urine, the tanner's craft engraves its reek into your very bones. You handle raw animal hides freshly stripped from carcasses. They're heavy, slick with blood, and buzzing with flies. Your hands fumble to scrape away fat and flesh with a blunt knife. The smell rises, half-rotting meat, half-wet dog, and you gag but keep going. In this age, nothing is wasted, and your labor ensures that animal skins become leather for shoes, belts, saddles, and armor. Without you, knights would march barefoot and peasants would trudge in rags. Historians still argue whether tanning was deliberately banished to the edges of medieval towns because of its smell or because of the pollution it caused in waterways. Either way, you don't live near the market square or church bell. You live where the wind always shifts wrong, carrying the reek of hides, smoke, and dung. Yes, dung. The process depends on it. You soak hides in vats filled with dog dung and pigeon droppings, the enzymes helping soften the leather. The stench is overwhelming, searing your nostrils until you barely notice it anymore. You stir the vat with a long pole, splashing your tunic, wincing as the foul mixture soaks through. When neighbors mutter that you're less a man and more a walking cesspit, they're not exaggerating. A quirky tidbit: medieval apprentices sometimes had the unlucky task of stomping the hides directly in the dung mixture, bare-legged just like a fuller in his urine vat. Imagine trudging in circles, knee-deep in filth, while your master shouted at you to keep the pace steady. The lucky ones only had to stir with sticks. The danger isn't only disgust. The hides themselves rot if left too long. You wrestle with slippery skins that slip from your grasp and tumble into the vat, forcing you to plunge your arms deep into the muck to retrieve them. Your fingers blister and swell, skin peeling from constant contact with lime used in the early soaking stages. Some tanners lose nails entirely, their hands a patchwork of scars and calluses. But when the process works, when the hide emerges supple and strong, you glimpse the value in your labor. The leather you've helped create might become a knight's polished boots or the binding of a scholar's treasured book. You remind yourself of that as you cough through the smoke of your drying racks, eyes stinging, chest heavy from years of inhaling fumes. You're also marked socially. Children run past with hands over their noses. Women cross themselves when you approach the well, hoping you don't linger. Even your coins earned through tanning sometimes get refused in taverns, unless you pay extra for the smell tax. You chuckle bitterly. In a society that prizes appearances, you'll never escape your odor. Yet there's a strange pride buried under the muck. No one sings about tanners, no minstrel strums a lute for them, but without you, the very framework of medieval life collapses. Harnesses snap, boots rot, armor straps break. You are invisible, but necessary. The paradox defines your days. At night, you wash your arms in the river, though the water carries its own layer of scum and dye. The stink never leaves, not fully. You lie awake on a straw mat, hearing the river lap against the bank, wondering if you'll live to old age, or if the fumes will choke you before your beard turns gray. But tomorrow you'll rise again. More hides will arrive. More dung vats will bubble. And you, the tanner, will scrape and stir, until the town's leatherwork gleams in the sunlight, while you remain in the shadows, stinking but essential. The stink of tanning fades only to be replaced by something sharper, something more sinister. Tonight you find yourself gripping a heavy iron blade, not in battle but at the town gate. You're the headsman, the executioner, the figure everyone knows but no one dares to befriend. The work is as grim as it sounds. You stand before a trembling prisoner, their crimes shouted aloud by the bailiff. The crowd gathers, eager for spectacle, murmuring prayers or jeers. You raise your weapon, the edge glinting in the light, and you feel their stares burrow into your back. Some watch with horror, others with a cruel fascination. You are both feared and needed, a tool of justice and intimidation. Historians still argue whether executioners in the Middle Ages were considered part of the law or treated more like necessary outcasts. In truth, you straddle both worlds. The town relies on you to enforce its harsh punishments, beheading nobles, hanging thieves, branding criminals. Yet when you walk home, shutters slam shut. People mutter that death clings to you, that your shadow alone can curdle milk. Your job isn't steady either. Some weeks pass without an execution. Other times you have to perform several in a row, your arms sore, your stomach twisted. Precision matters. A clean beheading earns grim respect. A botched one, several strikes needed, blood spraying in wild arcs, leaves you cursed, spat at, and despised. You practice your swing on hay bales, but nerves can undo even the strongest arm. A quirky tidbit: in certain towns, the executioner doubled as the local garbage collector and animal skinner, since no one else wanted such filthy work. Imagine finishing a hanging at dawn only to spend your afternoon dragging dead dogs to a pit. Glamorous? Not in the slightest. The dangers aren't only physical. Yes, a prisoner might fight back, or a crowd might riot if they think justice was unfair. But the deeper wound is inside you. Each face you see in those final moments lingers in your mind. You tell yourself it's duty, that you're carrying out God's will and the law's command. Still, when you lie awake at night, you remember their eyes, the fear, the pleading, the resignation. Your family bears the weight too. Children whisper that your daughter is cursed, that she'll bring bad luck if she touches the maypole. Your wife struggles to buy bread because bakers refuse her coins, saying they smell of death. You live at the edge of town, not unlike the tanners and fullers, but your exile is more social than practical. You could be clean as a nobleman and still people wouldn't shake your hand. Yet there's also a twisted respect. When soldiers march by, they nod to you. When judges sit in their robes, they rely on you to carry out their sentences. You are the sharp end of justice, the one who makes law real. And though they never thank you, they never forget that without you, their words mean nothing. Still, the toll builds. You drink more than you should, trying to numb the memory of screams. You mutter prayers you don't believe in, hoping to lighten your soul. And every time you polish your blade, you wonder how many more necks it will sever before your own life ends, perhaps under another executioner's hand. So you keep working, day after day, your shadow long and dreaded. A job no one wants, but one society cannot function without. The worst part isn't the blood or the curses. It's the silence afterward when the crowd disperses and you stand alone with your blade, wondering whether you're more tool than man. The clang of steel rings in your ears now, but not because you wear it proudly. You're not a knight. You're the boy behind the knight, the invisible hands that polish, mend, and serve. Tonight you are a squire, though the glamour you imagined as a child has evaporated under the weight of muck, bruises, and endless chores. By day, you lug heavy armor across muddy courtyards piece by piece until your shoulders scream. You tighten straps on gauntlets, oil blades until they gleam, and fetch fresh horseshoes from the blacksmith. A knight never appears disheveled. That's your job. You kneel in the straw, scrubbing dried blood from chainmail links, fingers raw and blistered. Each ring has to be clean because one weak spot could cost your master his life. Historians still argue whether the squire's role was an honored apprenticeship or a glorified servant position. You feel both at once. Yes, you're being trained. Perhaps one day to ride into battle with a crest on your chest. But until then, you're chamber boy, mule driver, cook's assistant, and weapons carrier. And the knight you serve isn't always grateful. He might bark orders, cuff you for clumsiness, or laugh when you stagger under his shield's weight. There are moments of thrill. You ride behind him in a tournament, holding the spare lance, heart racing as trumpets sound. But while the crowd cheers the knight, you're the one cleaning vomit from his helmet afterward or dressing his wounds when the tilt goes wrong. You're half nurse, half shadow, a quirky tidbit. Squires were sometimes ordered to sleep at the foot of the knight's bed, partly for service and partly as an early warning if assassins crept in. Imagine being woken at midnight not by dreams but by your master's boots kicking your ribs, telling you to fetch water, or worse, to ready his armor in the dark. The danger is constant. In battle you don't fight in the glorious charge. You wait just behind, holding the spare horse, dodging arrows, praying you're not mistaken for an enemy. If your knight falls, it's your duty to drag him out of the melee, risking your own neck in the chaos of swords and hooves. Many squires die before they ever earn knighthood, their names forgotten even as their master's deeds are sung. At the manor, the work doesn't ease. You carry trays to feasts, sweat dripping as nobles laugh and spill wine. You learn to bow at the right moment, to keep silent unless spoken to. You stand for hours, aching, only to slip away at midnight and polish armor until dawn. There is no rest when you serve chivalry, and yet, you cling to the dream. The thought that one day, you might be the one striding into the lists, pennon snapping in the wind, instead of the boy tightening the girth strap. That hope keeps you moving, keeps you scrubbing and fetching and running until your legs ache. But tonight, as you sit in the stable yard, hands raw from saddle soap, you know the truth. Being a squire is less about glory and more about survival. You carry the burden of someone else's legend, your own story postponed, your own strength tested in silence. Maybe one day you'll rise. Or maybe you'll just be another boy who broke his back in service, his name lost to time. The clatter of hooves and the smell of armor fade, and now you're swallowed by smoke, heat, and the roar of a roaring hearth. You are no knight's apprentice tonight. You are a kitchen drudge, the bottom rung in the castle's great hall of food. The kitchen is not romantic, it is chaos. Pots big enough to bathe and bubble over flames that scorch your skin. The air is thick with sweat, smoke, and the greasy perfume of roasting meat. You scurry barefoot on slippery stones, dodging kicks from older cooks and orders barked like whiplashes. Your hands are red with onion juice, your arms dotted with burns from spits and cauldrons. Historians still argue whether castle kitchens were marvels of organized production or just bedlam with ladles. You know the answer. Both. The head cook might bark orders like a general, but the army of boys like you scrambles, drops things, slips, and sometimes ruins an entire feast with one mistake. If a noble's dish is spoiled, you get the blame, and punishment could mean a cuff to the head or worse, being dismissed hungry and penniless. A quirky tidbit: kitchens sometimes doubled as makeshift hospitals, because all the boiling water, knives, and herbs were close at hand. Imagine cutting bread in the morning, then holding down a screaming soldier while his wound was cauterized with a red-hot iron in the afternoon. You never quite know what job you'll be handed next. The hours never end. Before dawn, you're hauling water from the well, your back aching as buckets slam against your legs. By mid-morning, you're plucking geese, feathers sticking to your sweaty face. At noon, you're hacking turnips with a blade so dull it feels like a punishment. After dark, when nobles feast, you scuttle behind servers, fetching more bread, more wine, more pies. And when they're done, you clean the greasy wreckage until the floor shines. The dangers are constant. You slip near the hearth and nearly tumble into the flames. You cut your palm to the bone on a cleaver too heavy for you. You inhale smoke until your chest rattles. Many drudges don't live long enough to escape this work, their lungs ruined, their backs bent like old men before they're even 20. And yet, food is power. You see scraps that peasants outside the walls could never dream of. Pork, sweetmeats, fresh fish from distant rivers. If you're bold, you sneak bites, though if caught, your ears might ring from a slap or worse. But sometimes, hunger wins. After all, who else will eat the slightly burnt goose or the fallen custard? Still, there's no glory here. Nobles toast each other with silver goblets, never glancing at the sweat-drenched boys who made it possible. When minstrels sing about grand feasts, no one sings about your blistered feet or the stink of rotten cabbage water clinging to your hair. You work on, knife in hand, sweat dripping, stomach growling. The castle kitchen is the belly of power, but for you, it's just another kind of furnace, one that burns away youth, patience, and hope, leaving only tired bones and grease-stained rags. The smoke and grease fade, and now you feel damp earth beneath your boots. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of decay. Tonight you are not cooking food, you are preparing space for the dead. You are a gravedigger, the quiet laborer who makes room in crowded soil. You lean on your spade, eyeing the plot you've been told to clear. Cemeteries in the Middle Ages aren't peaceful lawns of marble markers. They're cramped, churned, and sometimes overflowing. Graves collapse into one another, bones poke through the soil like forgotten roots. And when the priest points to a new spot, you dig, even if you strike the remains of someone else long before you reach the proper depth. Historians still argue whether medieval graveyards were carefully managed sacred spaces or chaotic heaps of bodies laid wherever room could be found. You know the truth lies somewhere between. Holy ground is holy ground, yes, but space is scarce, and people die faster than the earth can make room. Especially during plague years, the soil seems to heave with the sheer number of corpses. A quirky tidbit. It was common for gravediggers to collect stray bones and stack them neatly in ossuaries, bone houses where skulls and femurs were piled like firewood. Imagine spending your afternoon digging, only to finish by carting armloads of ribs into a dark chamber and arranging them for the next century of visitors to stare at. Your work is not only hard, but terrifying. At night, villagers whisper that spirits wander the graveyard, resentful of shallow burials or disturbed sleep. You laugh it off, but even you flinch when a crow screeches at dusk. And then there's the smell, the sweet rotten tang that clings to your clothes, so strong that tavern keepers sometimes refuse to let you sit indoors. The pay is poor, and respect is absent. You handle death with your hands, but no one thanks you. Instead, they cross themselves when you pass, as if your work makes you contagious. You dig alone, sweat mixing with damp soil, back aching from the constant bend and lift. Danger, too, is part of the job. The ground collapses unexpectedly, trapping your leg. A grave wall caves in, burying you up to the waist. Worst of all, when you handle plague victims, you risk catching the sickness yourself. Many gravediggers don't survive the very work that gives them bread, and yet the work continues. Death never pauses, never spares you a day. The church bell tolls, and another body is brought. You shoulder your spade, muttering a tired prayer, and dig until the world seems nothing but dirt, sweat, and silence. In the end, you know the bitter irony. You carve space for others, day after day, but when your own time comes, there may be no one left to carve space for you. The ground you've opened for countless souls might swallow you as just another nameless body, laid into the soil you once turned. Your spade clatters to the ground, and the earth's damp chill gives way to a stench so sharp it makes your eyes water. You are no longer in the graveyard. Tonight you are the tanner, the one who turns dead animal hides into leather, the material nobles flaunt and peasants desperately need. You work on the edge of town, far from polite company. Tanneries are banished to the outskirts because no one wants your stink near their homes. The air is thick with urine, dung, and rotting flesh. You wade into pits filled with foul liquids, hauling hides so slippery you sometimes fall headfirst into the very filth you're paid to stir. Historians still argue whether tanning was seen as a skilled craft essential to the economy, or simply a filthy occupation no one respected. You know it's both. Without you, knights would march barefoot, monks would write on no parchment, and merchants would carry their goods in baskets instead of leather satchels. Yet townsfolk wrinkle their noses when you pass, whispering that you reek worse than the animals you strip. A quirky tidbit: tanners often used dog dung to soften hides. Boys were sometimes paid to collect it in buckets from the streets, bringing you a daily supply of what polite society called pure. Imagine children proudly handing over piles of droppings, knowing it was as valuable to you as silver. The process is endless. First, you scrape hair and flesh from hides with blunt knives, your arms aching as the blade slips and gouges your hand. Then you soak the skins in lime pits, where the chemical burns your skin raw. Days later, you stir them in foul vats, the stink clinging to your beard, your clothes, even your dreams. Finally, you stretch and dry them, hoping the leather won't crack and ruin your week's work. Accidents are common. The lime eats through flesh, leaving scars and ulcers. The fumes choke your lungs, leaving you wheezing like an old man by 30. Sometimes workers fall into vats and drown, their bodies retrieved days later, bloated and pale. And yet, your craft has power. You make belts, boots, saddles, armor straps, the very things that hold medieval life together. Nobles strut in fine-tooled shoes, never thinking of the man waist-deep in filth who shaped them. Monks scratch words on vellum, praising God, while you cough blood into your hand after a day of scraping skins. You are indispensable, but despised. A walking paradox. The man who keeps the kingdom clothed, yet cannot enter its churches without mutters. The man who provides the tools of war, yet is denied the honor of a warrior's place. At night, you try to wash, scrubbing until your skin is raw, but the stink never leaves. It seeps into your pores, into your bed, even into your children's hair. No one forgets that you are the tanner. Even if you escape this life, your smell marks you forever. And when you collapse into sleep, the scent of dung and lime still clings to your dreams, reminding you that in the Middle Ages, some jobs are prisons you never leave. The stink of the tannery fades, replaced by something sharper, something metallic. You are no longer handling hides. You're handling waste, and not the kind from animals. Tonight you are a gong farmer, one of the most dreaded workers in medieval towns. Your job is simple to explain and horrific to perform. You shovel human excrement out of cesspits. You work when others sleep. At night, with only a lantern swinging in your hand, you slip into back alleys and climb down into pits dug beneath houses and inns. The air is so foul you gag before you take your first step. A mix of rot, ammonia, and decay presses against your lungs. You lower your bucket, scoop after scoop, until your arms shake. Then you haul it up and dump it into a cart, repeating until the pit is finally empty. Historians still argue whether gong farmers were better paid than other low-class workers, or simply shunned as untouchables. You know the truth. The money is decent, sometimes more than a servant makes, but no amount of coins can wash away the disgust. Townsfolk avoid your eyes. Children point and laugh. Even beggars wrinkle their noses when you pass. A quirky tidbit: cesspits were often forgotten until they overflowed, sometimes bursting into streets or cellars with catastrophic results. When that happened, your work became an emergency. You'd be called at once, shovel in hand, to stem the tide before it poisoned an entire neighborhood. The dangers are constant. The fumes burn your throat, leaving your voice raspy. Some nights you descend too deep, and the lack of fresh air suffocates you. A slip on the ladder could plunge you into the pit itself, and there are stories of gong farmers drowning in filth before anyone could pull them out. You work alone, but sometimes with a partner who passes you buckets. Conversation is minimal. You can't breathe enough to talk anyway. The lantern's glow flickers off the walls, and in the silence, you wonder how many years you'll shave off your life by breathing this air. And yet without you, the town collapses. Waste builds, water taints, plague spreads faster. You are invisible yet vital. People complain about you, But if you vanished, they would be wading through their own refuse within weeks. When your night's work ends, you drag your cart out of town and dump the loads into fields as fertilizer. Farmers look away as you pass, but their crops grow taller because of you. It's another irony of the Middle Ages. Your filth feeds their bread. But no matter how many coins you earn, no matter how essential your work, respect never comes. By daylight, you are a ghost in the marketplace, someone mothers warn their children not to touch. And at night, you descend again, lantern swinging, spade scraping into the darkest part of medieval life, carrying away what no one else dares to face. The lantern sputters out and the stench of cesspits gives way to a new kind of suffocation. The air here is dense, smoky, and laced with the metallic tang of dust. You are underground now, a miner, clawing at the earth for the riches kings crave: salt, tin, silver, coal. Your body bends low in a tunnel no taller than your shoulders, and you chip at stone until your hands tremble. Mining in the Middle Ages is no glamorous venture. The shafts are narrow, the supports crude. You crawl through blackness, guided only by a flickering candle, knowing that one wrong strike could bring the ceiling down on your head. Children often work beside you, their small bodies forced into tighter cracks. You hear their coughs echoing in the dark, and you keep digging because stopping means no bread. Historians still argue whether medieval mining was a specialized trade with protections or a brutal free-for-all where laborers were disposable. You feel like the latter. Nobles want the ore, kings demand the taxes, and merchants profit from the metal. But you, the one pulling it from the rock, are just another name on a list of debts. A quirky tidbit: some miners trained canaries, carrying them in little cages to warn of bad air. If the bird fainted or died, you scrambled for your life, clawing toward the light. Imagine that, your safety depending on a creature smaller than your fist. The dangers multiply with every strike. Dust fills your lungs until you wheeze and spit black. Water floods tunnels, drowning whole teams before help can come. Fires from sparks ignite pockets of gas, sending flames racing through shafts faster than you can run. And when the ceiling collapses, rescuers sometimes dig for days, only to find nothing but silence. You earn little and spend it fast, on candles, on tools, on ale strong enough to numb the ache in your spine. By 30, your back curves, your fingers swell, and your teeth loosen from years of grit grinding between them. Still, tomorrow you return, descending into darkness. For without miners, the world above cannot shine. Knights cannot wear armor, churches cannot ring bells, and coins cannot clink in noblemen's pockets. When you finally emerge, covered in dust and sweat, townsfolk avoid your eyes. They whisper that miners are cursed, too close to the underworld. You laugh bitterly because you know the truth. You live half your life buried, and one day the earth will simply refuse to let you out. And yet you shoulder your pick once more, candle trembling in your hand, and disappear again into the belly of the mountain, knowing that the worst jobs are often the ones holding the kingdom together in silence. The mountain closes behind you, but your toil is not done. Tonight you shoulder a long wooden pole tipped with a metal hook. You are a leech collector, a strange figure in the margins of medieval medicine. Your job is not in the mines, nor in the city, but in swamps, bogs, and marshes where fat leeches writhe in the shallows, waiting for warm flesh. You wade barefoot, your skin prickling as the cold water laps your calves. Then comes the bite, sharp, quick, and unsettling. A leech attaches to your leg, then another, and another, until your skin crawls with wriggling black bodies. You let them feed because that's the only way to harvest them. Once they've swollen with your blood, you pluck them off, toss them into a jar, and wait for the next one to clamp on. By night's end, your legs are stippled with wounds, blood trickling down, mosquitoes buzzing at the feast. Historians still argue whether leech collecting was a specialized trade passed through families, or a desperate side hustle for peasants with no land. You know only that your purse is light and your skin is always scarred. Apothecaries pay you in coins, priests whisper blessings, and physicians nod gravely as they pack your catch into pouches. The nobility believe the leeches cure everything, from headaches to fevers to melancholy. You know better. Half the time, the patient dies anyway, pale and drained, though the doctor insists the balance of humors has been restored. A quirky tidbit. Some collectors trained cows and horses to wade into bogs, letting the animals attract the leeches instead. Imagine tugging them off a horse's legs by the handful, your basket squirming with dozens of slick bodies. It saved your own skin, though not the animal's patience. The dangers are quieter than in the mines, but no less real. Leeches spread infection, leaving your legs raw and swollen. Some collectors faint from blood loss after a night of bites. And the marsh itself hides perils. Mud sucking at your ankles, sudden sinkholes, snakes coiled in reeds. One slip and the bog swallows you whole. Yet without you, medicine stalls. Surgeons cannot bleed their patients. Monks cannot prepare their remedies. And nobles cannot boast that they've been purified of bad humors. You are the secret supplier, working in silence, feeding the illusion of health in an age that barely understood the body. When you limp home at dawn, your legs burn, your jars slosh, and your family turns away from the sight of your wounds. You collapse into bed, dizzy from loss, knowing tomorrow you'll return to the swamp. Because someone must do it, and in the Middle Ages, the worst jobs always fall to those who can't refuse. And now, as the echoes of these worst jobs fade, you feel the world grow softer, quieter, slower. The clang of picks, the slosh of vats, the buzzing of swamps, each sound drifts away like a lantern dimming in the fog. You've walked through graveyards and bogs, down into pits and up to the gallows, and somehow you've come back, whole, though marked with the weight of their lives. Your breath steadies. The air feels cleaner here, lighter, free from the smoke and stench. You picture the night sky above a medieval village, the stars scattered like silver dust, the hush of the countryside wrapping around narrow streets. Somewhere a church bell tolls once, and then falls silent. Let the tension in your body ease now. Imagine setting down the spade, the pick, the hook. Your hands unclench, your back straightens. No more carrying hides, no more climbing ladders, no more kneeling in muck. Just quiet, just rest. Every job you've glimpsed tonight was harsh, thankless, unforgiving. Yet even in those shadows, there were flickers of resilience. The gravedigger humming to himself, the tanner sharpening his knife with practiced rhythm, the miner lighting his candle with a trembling smile. Each one endured, and each one, in their own way, held the medieval world together. As you close your eyes, let their burdens fall away from you. You are not them. You are safe, warm, breathing steady in the present. The worst is only a story now, dissolving into whispers that fade into silence. So let sleep take you gently, like the tide lapping at the edge of a shore.